Welcome back to the channel. Today we're looking at the DF64 Gen 2, and I was really not looking forward to making this video, and that's because I have to be honest, I really did not like the DF64 Gen 1. Now, before you pile on, I appreciate what the DF64 Gen 1 did. You know, flat burr grinders, they're very nice, but they also tend to be pretty expensive, and it really undercut a lot of the other grinders price-wise and allowed a bunch of new people to kind of jump into this type of grinder, which I love that. But it was also pretty janky. You know, the workflow was not the cleanest. There was a ton of static. The finishes were kind of rough, and you saw people making 3D printed parts to try and make it better. It's just not quite as clean as I would want for myself. So I didn't want to be that guy who started dumping on this grinder that really was doing something pretty good just because I didn't really love how it did it. The DF83 arrived, an 83mm version of this, and I did like that one a little bit better, but I was still, you know, kind of soft on it. And then the Gen 2 gets released. This one was sent to me by Espresso Outlet, and I wasn't very excited about it. And then I opened it and started testing it, and I got some big surprises. And provided you can make peace with a couple caveats, which we'll talk about in a minute, this grinder is a great grinder, and surprisingly to me, it has somewhat easily slid into my top recommendation at the price point for an all-around grinder at just under $400. First, let's talk build. You have this nice metal case, very similar to what you would see on the DF83. This is a big step up from the original vinyl wrapped DF64, which I'll be honest, it looked kind of cheap and it felt cheap and it looked kind of bad from my perspective. So right away you get a nice upgrade. This grind cup, huge improvement. Even over the DF83 Gen 1, you know, this feels like a premium cup. The old one was plastic, again, very cheap. You know, this is nice, it's beefy. I was very glad to see that. It's also got this little riser ring, which comes with the DF83 as well. And there's little O-rings around here, which stop this from kind of rattling around on there when your grinder is running, so that's a nice little touch. But what's really nice is you don't even really need this anymore. The original DF64 was pretty notorious for the static that it created when it was running. You know, grinds would kind of fly everywhere and it was hard to keep them into the cup, and this was kind of designed to kind of make sure everything would kind of stay in there. But fortunately, on this version, in here, there's something called an ionizer. And what it does is it just applies a little electric charge to the grounds as they're coming out, which eliminates the static to basically nothing. Now, this is something that I wish every new coffee grinder would come out, because it makes a huge difference for the mess. You know, not having to clean stuff up after every grind, it's just a big win. Then you come up here, the adjustment ring is totally metal. Again, that's a nice step up from the original. It's got this adjustment ring right here, which is great. And this is also included on the DF83. The original DF64 didn't even have a part like this. You know, people were 3D printing them, so nice to see that. I still don't love this little exposed set screw here, but you know, that is what it is. When you take this part off, you can actually take the burr right out relatively quickly. You can see it's dirty because I've been grinding coffee with it. It's got this wave spring washer design, which again, that's a big step up, makes assembly, reassembly very easy. And there's nice tight tolerances in here, not a lot of retention, you know, it's really good. Some big improvements here. Also up here in this funnel, you know, they've put in this kind of anti-popcorning disc, which is nice. On the previous generations of this grinder and the DF83, you know, if you didn't have it covered up with the bellows here, you could get beans kind of flying out as it was grinding, and that problem has been pretty much totally eliminated with this version of the grinder. So almost my entire laundry list of issues that I had with the Gen 1 has, if not been eliminated, been vastly improved. Now, let me tell you something about me. I'm a little bit of an espresso snob, a coffee snob, a lot of my friends would say anyways, sure, but I'm also kind of lazy, and I like my kitchen to look a certain way. So I don't like a lot of steps in my puck preparation process, and I don't like ugly things sitting on my counter. You know, one thing that you'll see people doing is something called RDT, where you spritz your beans with a little bit of water to kind of tone down the static of a grinder. You would see this especially with coffee grinders like the DF64 Gen 1 to really minimize that static. I don't like RDT. I never liked it. I don't like the idea of moisture being inside my grinder. I don't like having to keep track of an extra little bottle and do that extra step as a part of my puck prep process. And similarly with these bellows, you know, I just don't like bellows. I find they look really bad, and it's another thing that you have to do. You know, you take the lid off and you have to pump them to get the grinds out, and I just don't like it. I never liked it. So when I got this grinder, I decided to test it without bellows and without RDT just to see what would happen. And I was pleasantly surprised. So I just ground up 18 grams. I'm just gonna give it a slap. We'll see how much I got out. And I have exactly 18 grams out. No RDT, no bellows. So I was very impressed with that. And that is largely due to the low retention design inside and the ionizer right here. Now, if you're in a very dry climate, you may still need to do RDT, but I was very happy to see this. Thumbs up. So when I'm doing these reviews, I always run a series of tests on a grinder. You know, one of the tests that I do is I just use it out of the box to see how it's going to work and how it's going to respond, you know, when somebody just takes it out and it's brand new. And I was getting solid espresso and great filter coffee right out of the box. So that was fantastic. I also always season a grinder to see if I get any improvements in the espresso particularly, but also the filter. And so I ran about 2 kilograms of coffee through it, and I did get some improvements. So that was kind of to be expected, but to get good shots out of the box is fantastic. Then I always give the grinder a full clean, and that helps me see, you know, is there retention inside? If so, how much? So even after doing a full 2 kilogram seasoning run, there was just under a gram of coffee left inside. You know, they've also redesigned the declumper in here since the Gen 1, and even with all the coffee that had kind of stuck in the chute after that process, less than a gram of coffee total. So that was great. Excuse me for just a sec. Also, I always do an alignment test to see how a coffee grinder's burrs are aligned. You know, how basically are they rotating in line with one another. It's a pretty simple test. You do it with a marker, and then, you know, you can shim a burr with aluminum if you need to kind of get it into level a little bit more. The burrs on this unit were perfectly aligned, something I very rarely see, especially with a grinder at this price. Now, the burrs themselves are proprietary. They're made by the same people who manufacture the DF64, and they're a nice burr. You know, when you're getting a new coffee grinder, the last thing you want to do is worry about upgrading the burrs. But this was a big thing that you saw with the DF64 Gen 1. You know, it came with these Ital mill burrs, which were okay. These ones I find are a little bit nicer to my tastes. It's giving you enough complexity to kind of feel like you have some body, but there's good clarity there too. You know, it's not far swung to one degree or the other, and it's a nice burr. You know, if I was buying this grinder and paying that much and it was going to be my only grinder, you know, I'd be happy with it. Like, this is some tasty espresso. So, lots of build improvements, lots of workflow improvements, good quality espresso and filter out of the box, which gets better over time, low price. We got some good stuff going on here. There are a couple caveats. Number one, this grinder looks a lot better than the Gen 1, especially once you kind of get rid of some of these more ugly bits like this. But I still wouldn't call it an attractive grinder. It's definitely got an industrial look. You know, this bit up here, especially the exposed set screw of the back, it's very kind of got like almost a machine shop vibe. You know, for me, that might not be what I would want in my kitchen, but it's a bit of a compromise with the price. Also, if you couldn't tell from when I ground, this is a very loud grinder. It squeals, it's high pitched. You know, it often gets compared to the niche grinders. Not only is it way louder than either of those, it's also louder than an EK43, which I reviewed on my channel recently, and it's widely regarded as one of the loudest grinders around. And So all I can say about this is your kids might not sleep through your morning puck prep routine if this is the grinder that you end up with. And just to nitpick a couple things here, you know, this metal cup, if it's not perfectly seated in here and there's like metal on metal, you can get a little bit of rattling. And also if you're using a portafilter with this, especially with oversized baskets, and you know, you have it seated in here and you're using this ring, it's kind of got an unpleasant rattle to it. It's not quite as bad as the last version, which didn't have this O-ring on it, but it's kind of annoying. One other minor thing, you know, if you are kind of into taking your grinder apart, really getting in there, giving it a deep clean, which I love to do, you know, with the way the declumper and the ionizer are put together in this front assembly here, it's kind of tedious to get right in there, get the declumper out and give it a proper cleaning. Overall though, it's a much smaller and more negligible list of negatives than I had with the DF64 Gen 1. And to me, somewhat remarkably, it has moved into my top recommendation spot at this price point. You have low price, low retention, very little static, better build quality, good espresso and filter out of the box. It is a pretty compelling package. Now, if you're just doing espresso or you're just doing filter, or you know, some of those fit and finish things are deal breakers for you, you might want to consider something else. And if you think that might be you, just drop your situation into the comments and I'll do my best to help you out. But I would love to hear from you guys watching. Can you get past the kind of industrial vibe for the sake of the price? Is a Burr upgrade something you would ever consider? I'm always trying to get a pulse on who would do that and who wouldn't do that. And if that is something that you would consider, what do you think about this grinder as a platform for that kind of thing? Do you see this as good value? Or is it still a lot more than you would hope to spend? I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic. Just a reminder, the top upgrade that you can make is in the coffee that you're drinking, so make sure you're buying good stuff, and we'll see you next time.